Yo dudes, how's it going? So this retrospective look back at Outrunners in the arcade here is actually just a small segment from a much larger video that I made looking at the entire history of Outrun, where I looked at every single one of its home ports, its sequels, and talked about the game's legacy as well. So if you enjoy this brief bit of Outrun chat here, why not check out the full video and get the lowdown on the entire Outrun series. But here though, for the purposes of this retro review mini, let's just keep our sights focused on Outrunners. The next arcade sequel after Turbo Outrun was Outrunners in 1993. In many ways, Outrunners went back to the original Outrun drawing board, returning the choice of branching routes and music selection, including some new versions of the original 3 tunes, as well as a whole heap of new ones. The biggest change that Outrunners ushered in though, was that it was the first arcade Outrun offering to include multiplayer. The standard cabinet came as a 2-player variety, with the ability to link up the cabinets for a whopping total of 8 players. Nice. The game also let you choose from a big selection of different non-licensed vehicles to play as. Outrunners is a bit of a funny one, coming out as it did in 1993 as a sprite-based 2D racer, just at a point in time that arcade racers were beginning to make the jump to proper 3D and polygons. Virtua Racing and Ridge Racer had already been released a year beforehand in 1992, and a prototype version of Daytona USA had started making the rounds at Japanese arcade machine trade fairs by 1993. So it seems strange that Sega, who are such big innovators of new technology, released another superscaler at this particular point in time. I did see a proper 8-player link-up Outrunner set up back in the 90s, but I never actually played on it, so again, my first true experiences of it have been through MAME. And unlike Turbo Outrun, Outrunners just instantly clicked with me. I think as much because of the fact it actually felt like a proper Outrun game in a way that Turbo just never did. Outrunners not only brought back the forks in the road, allowing you the ability to choose your route. At the start of the race you could choose to head east or west, which actually doubled up the amount of routes on the first game, leading to 10 possible goals. Not only did the game give you a choice of what music you wanted to listen to at the start of the race, it also actually let you swap the tunes on the fly as well, whilst you were racing. There was even a DJ guy on a radio station that spoke to you when you selected your tunes, called Jake Elwood, a name that should sound familiar to any fans of the old 1980s comedy film, The Blues Brothers, as it's basically the 2 first names of the Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi characters. The Blues Brothers also was a film that was notable for having some incredible car chases in it, that did really get quite insanely over the top by the end of it. Outrunners span the entire globe, rather than specifically sticking to the US or Europe, with stages based in Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Egypt, France, and many other locations, with bridges and undersea tunnels connecting up continents otherwise separated by oceans. The selectable cars, being non-licensed, are kind of recognisable homages to real-life vehicles, with the red convertible Speedbuster looking like the most obvious nod to the original game. Okay, so it's time to correct a little bit of incorrect information from my previous 30 years of Outrun video. In that one, I mentioned that Outrunners was Sega's last superscaler game, but Cool Riders, released in 1995, not 1994 as the title screen actually says, is the game that, as far as I'm aware, holds the honour of being Sega's last 2D racer. A multiplayer motorbike racing game with digitised sprites that is sometimes regarded as a spiritual successor to Outrunners, that was running on the Sega H1 board, the successor to the System 32 hardware that was running the new Outrun sequel. And quite honestly, 2D racing has never looked so good, with large and detailed scenery, vibrant colours, and lots of speed, with the game actually pulling off some visual trickery that could almost make you swear it's got some polygons in there. Despite never actually playing Outrunners in an arcade back in the day, I was recently able to right this wrong at a retro arcade I visited called Time Warp Arcade, which you can find in a town in the southwest of England called Bridgwater. It was awesome to finally get to play this classic game the way it was intended, getting to experience it in multiplayer in a proper sit-down cabinet, as well as the other things that are so great about the game. Multiplayer really was one of the big selling points in the arcade. With the ability to link 4 of the twin cabinets together for an 8-player game, creating an OutRun multiplayer experience unlike anything the previous games had offered. Outrunners only received a single port back in the day, which was for the Mega Drive, which never made it over to these shores, arriving only in Japan and the USA. It was ported by Data East rather than Sega themselves, and was heavily criticised on release for the fact that you could only play it in split screen mode. All things considered, I don't think it's a bad port myself. I think Data East did a fairly admirable job at managing to condense such a monster arcade machine into Sega's aging 16-bit hardware. But I think the lack of a full screen mode, complete with the fact you're forced to always race against a CPU opponent if you're not racing against a second human player, was definitely a really bad decision. An interesting addition to this version though, well in the Japanese version at any rate, is the inclusion of an extra bonus vehicle based on the F1 car from Virtua Racing. When you select it, you even get some of the Virtua Racing ditties playing in game, which I do think is a very nice touch. Although it never received any other ports back then, it has fairly recently had a new outing, so to speak, but we'll come on to that version when we talk about OutRun Legacy. In retrospect, it's a real shame that the Saturn never got a port of Outrunners. The Sega System 32 hardware would have lent itself nicely to a decent Saturn conversion, I reckon. I also can't believe it never got the 3DS Sega Ages treatment. I would have loved to have seen M2 being able to work their 3D stereoscopic magic on this classic. And with the handheld's link-up ability, it would have been perfect for some multiplayer on the go. As far as home emulation goes though, things are pretty good on that front. The standard version of Outrunners loads in a 2-player setup in MAME, meaning you can easily do some quick 2-player split-screen games. It's actually possible in MAME to link up 4 different versions of the emulator if you actually wanted to do some 8-player multiplayer in either a single system setup or across a multi-PC LAN. It's even possible to play the game now with force feedback on your PC using a racing wheel, courtesy of a force feedback plugin for MAME created by Boomslang from the Build Your Own Arcade Controls forum, who's also now a Technoparrot developer. My feeling is that coming out when it did, at the dawn of the 3D polygon revolution, Outrunners has unfortunately always been a bit overshadowed by the likes of your Ridge Racers, Daytonas and Sega Rallies, which is a real shame, as it's a great game and it really does feel like a natural progression from the 1986 original without the mistakes made by Turbo. Between 1986 and 1993, OutRun also received a load of home market only sequels, which I think, unlike Turbo and Outrunners, can generally be regarded as non-canon by the fact their soundtracks have never been included on any of the OutRun Complete Works audio releases. 2 of these exclusive home ports were for the Sega Master System. But you'll need to watch the full version of my 35 years of OutRun video if you want to find out more about those. I'll make a link to it appear now in the YouTube end screen. Why not check it out?